Good morning, everyone. Well, first and foremost, let me also welcome all of you to Palo Alto Networks Federal Ignite. As many of you know, this is my day 140 on the job, and I'm learning every day. But I want to start off by saying thank you, because I spent the time yesterday, and Grant and Jeanette and others were very kind, and I walked around DC understanding the challenge of cybersecurity. And I saw a lot of people dedicated to the cause. I saw a lot of people in uniform. It reminded me of my father, who I unfortunately lost 2 years ago to ALS. He used to work in the Indian Air Force, and he dedicated 38 years of his life to serving the country. So I understand truly the sacrifice people make in public service and working for the military in support and in service of the country. So I want to thank all of you from the bottom of my heart for what you do for the country. I came to this country with $2,000 and an ambition and a willingness to work hard. I also know the opportunities this country affords people like me who have ambition and willingness to work hard. So I also want to thank all of you for that opportunity. But moving on from that, I had a choice to go to many places in my life, and I decided as I turned 50 that I wanted to dedicate the next chapter of my life to doing something which was mission-driven. And as I looked at the landscape, as I looked at the opportunity at the confluence of technology and being mission-driven, spending time with Mark McLaughlin, my predecessor, and the board of Palo Alto Networks, I realized that this was a company which had been built with a clear mission in mind and was trying to solve a phenomenal problem on a global basis, without which I don't think we're all going to be collectively able to make that transformation from where we are to where we need to go, in terms of transformation from a technological perspective, transformation from sort of an evolution perspective. As we get consumed by more and more data, we have to figure out how to make sure we manage that data, how to make sure we make that transformation in a secure and in a seamless fashion. So I'm excited and delighted to be here at Palo Alto Networks. Now I'm a cybersecurity expert, having spent 140 days on the topic. It is clear as mud to me. So without launching off too much about cybersecurity, what I thought, we'll give you two for the price of one. The good news is Mark McLaughlin hasn't left. He's still here with us. I get to do all the hard work. He gets to be the ambassador of the company now. So what we're going to do is Mark and I are going to do a quick chat, and hopefully I get to ask Mark some questions, and Mark gets to ask me some questions. And once again, thank you for being here.
Well, thanks. Good to see everybody. I've had a chance to meet most of you in the last couple decades out here, and really delighted to be here at Fed Ignite. As you heard Patrick say when he kicked off, this is our going at our fourth year here. We had about 100 people before, about 1,700 people registered today. So it's just really great to see the level of attention that we've been able to garner by bringing people together to network. And I want to welcome Nikesh as well.
Thank you, Mark.
Yes, it's been a delight to have you on board so far. I thought maybe one thing to be
Nobody said so far.
So far.
It's reserving
Talk
judgment.
about day 141, right? Yeah. And the reason I wanted to do this was so that Nikesh couldn't get up here and say, well, the old guy screwed everything up, right? Yeah.
This is your own security.
Exactly, exactly. But, I thought one thing might be interesting for folks, and there's a question behind this, is we were thinking at the board level for Palo Alto Networks, which has been really fortunate to grow in a really short period of time to the largest security company in the world. What does the next chapter of Palo Alto Networks look like from a leadership perspective after I made the decision to retire? It really forced us to consider some things that candidly we hadn't thought a lot about except at the technical level before, which was what's the next 5 to 7 years of security look like as opposed to the previous 5 or 7. And we assumed, and I think we're right on this, that it will look nothing like it looks today. Right? And that was really important on skill sets, talent, and on vision about what the world's going to look like. And we really started to think hard about a world in which security is primarily in the cloud, in which it is primarily driven by massive data sets and artificial intelligence applied to those things. It's primarily driven as a software platform where most of security, our belief, would actually be delivered as applications in the future as opposed to more widgets that we would all have to go deploy and things we were driving towards as a company. So that really led us in our leadership search for someone more like Nikesh than folks who might be kind of the standard enterprise security folks as well. And so you mentioned a little earlier a lot of opportunities, but what aspects of that were really interesting for you just to get into security and also Palo Alto Networks that led you to get excited about this?
So thanks, Mark, first of all, and thank you for the endorsement. What's fascinating is, observing this from an outsider's perspective, not from a cybersecurity perspective. There are a few takeaways I've learned in the last 4.5 months. One, it's very hard to secure something which wasn't designed in the first place with security in mind. And we've seen that happen in the past from hardware perspective, from device perspective, and it kind of works the same way in the infrastructure. So as we go on this transformation journey, it's very important to think about it up front. And I'm not, this is not a Palo Alto pitch, it's just as you design your future transformation, as you design your future infrastructure, you have to think about security from the beginning. So that's sort of my first takeaway. My second takeaway is what we call cybersecurity today is 80% hygiene and 20% security. And what I mean by that is, we call security, we talk about policies, we talk about, it's kind of like, I use house analogies. So it's like buying a house and saying, counting how many windows do you have, how many doors do you have, how many locks are there, and what time the lights should be shut off. That's very good. It stops people from wandering into your house, which is a good thing. What it doesn't stop is somebody with a machine gun who's decided he wants to break into your house. It doesn't matter how many doors or windows you have, you lock them or not. You've got to figure out what are you going to do in that situation. So I just like looking at the products in the industry, looking at what we have, I just get a sense that 80% of what we do is hygiene, 20% of what we do is security. And I think in 5 to 7 years from now, those numbers have to reverse themselves. We cannot be talking about hygiene 5 to 7 years. We have to be talking about security. Now, if you think about it and say, okay, what does security look like? How do we secure ourselves? I think the notion of a lot of us staring at screens and looking at alerts and trying to figure out what to do about them, I think by that time, somebody's walked in, taken your jewels, and left by the time you figure that out. Because you're actually getting alert when either it's happening right now or it happened to you. So this notion that we're going to be living in a SOC world, I think is something that we have to rethink. I don't think we're going to be living in a SOC world. This stuff has to happen using computers. So with that in mind, as Mark talked to me about this, and I've been spending a lot of time thinking, so my learning process is I read every night for hours, stuff around cybersecurity, and the next morning I wake up and I torture Lee Klarich, our head of product and our founder, Nir Zuk, with all kinds of stupid questions. I don't know, and Lee's going to come talk later in the day. He can give you my accountability rating in terms of where I've reached, in terms of number of stupid questions versus interesting insights, but we'll let him figure that out. But one of the insights which I think we have as a company, and I share, is that when we talk about security 5 to 7 years from now, security has to be based on some form of AI, some form of computing that is going to anticipate or look at patterns, look at them in a zero trust way every second, every day, and figure out how to block the bad guys. Now, if you want to get there, it's not enough to talk about transformation of the cloud and cloud security. It actually becomes important to talk about a consistent data set. And we haven't talked about that yet. In the last day and a half, we haven't gotten there because we're still busy making the transformation from on-prem or traditional infrastructure towards the cloud. But the question then becomes, okay, with all the encryption in the world, with all the systems in the world, how do we create this large data lake where we're watching patterns, watching behaviors, analyzing behaviors, and able to anticipate where behavior goes wrong? We're worried about bad actors versus good actors. I'm thinking about good actors turning bad actors for a split second or for a minute. What do you do then? So the entire sort of pivot that we want to make as a company is away from this conversation about 140 security vendors or 2,000 security vendors. It's a conversation about how do we take a look at your infrastructure holistically, step back, and say, what are all the behavioral entry points of your infrastructure, whether it's your endpoint, whether it's your cloud, whether it's your network. How do we collect them into one common place, understand the fundamental sort of the basic data set, and then how do we run analytics on top of that? and I can go into more detail in terms of what I've learned, but I thought that vision which Lee and Nir and you shared with me as I came here, and the more I thought about it, really resonated that this is going to be a world which will be dominated by AI and machine learning, the sort of the prerequisite to which is collecting good data. And I think part of what our company has designed is a set of products which actually analyze or look at good data. We're still in the process of sort of building the analytics on top of it, but in the future, we expect security vendors or security solutions will be built either by our customers or by third parties who will live on this data lake, so we don't have to keep deploying tons and tons of instrumentation into the network, into the infrastructure over time. Because I was in NATO as one of my first customer visits, and they're still waiting for an approval for 5 years to install the vendors that they'd agreed 5 years ago. Unfortunately, they have to rethink the vendors now because they just got approval. So.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And Jeanette was just talking on stage about, I think, everybody's desire to drive to increased automation. These are the words you hear: increased automation, increased integration. It might be interesting for folks here, a quick update on our concept of the application, or the reality of the application framework, which really is kind of driving what you're talking. I'm not sure everybody's familiar with it, but is driving what you're talking about, this real platform kind of view about in a few years' time.
Yeah. So I think just to elaborate on what we just talked about, I think, it's fascinating. If you look at the security industry, most vendors or partners are vertically integrated. We collect our own data, we analyze our own data, we understand where the bad stuff is, we run it against the cloud, bring it back, check it, and we provide a solution. So I went and visited a large bank in New York, and they have 140 security vendors in their infrastructure. They have 12 endpoints. It's like they have 10,000 people programming and helping them integrate these things into security infrastructure. Now, I heard Grant talk earlier at breakfast. I heard various people from the government talk about this. The problem we're going to run into is we're not going to have a skilled enough workforce to run these integrations across every agency in the government. Today, a cybersecurity solution requires 80% integration, 20% product, which makes little sense. Which means you need more resources to deploy our sort of security infrastructure than you need product. We've got to figure out a way of pivoting that. We've got to figure out a way of, again, making that the reverse. And the only way we can make that happen is if we reduce the time to deployment, we reduce the complexity in the industry, and we reduce the need for integration in the industry. So our view is if we can create sensors that collect data from your infrastructure, you don't need another sensor. So our endpoint Traps is being designed to collect every element of data that you would need 14 different endpoint vendors to collect. It's okay, we'll do all the data collection. Now all the data collection has been done. It's now in your specific data lake. Let's run those algorithms against that data lake as opposed to come and deploy 13 more endpoint vendors. Right? That's just one case in point. Same thing with the network. We'll collect all the data out of your network, put it in this data lake. Now you can cross-reference your endpoint data with your network data and run applications on top of that, as opposed to running vertical applications in each of those two situations. So, and so on and so on. So our vision is, let's figure out a way of taking all the data from all the sensors, put it into a data lake, run it there, and have people write applications on top of that. And we're very excited because we've launched that in beta. We've had 40 different security vendors write applications on top of the data, and now they're realizing the benefit of not having to go to our 55,000 customers and request them to deploy yet another endpoint, yet another network probe. And we're hoping that that starts to become the new way of the future, where it's not us who's going to show up with all the innovation. It's going to be other security vendors, and you're perfectly comfortable to deal with them. But we want it to be such that a threat shows up in the morning, all the data is already in the data lake, you find the right solution in the next few days, and it's a matter of subscribing to a yet new security service, and it's deployed to your infrastructure. Now, I know it sounds a bit more futuristic than it needs to, but part of our view is that if you can't think it, you can't build it. So we're already thinking it, and we're in the process of building it.
Yeah. And related to that, I mean, large data sets, and to deliver what you just said, cloud's increasingly important. And, you said you've been in the job for 140 days and have moved with alacrity already on an acquisition of a company called Redlock. Maybe you can describe cloud vision, Palo Alto Networks, why Redlock, and what's the future look like there? Yeah,
so this is where I'm going to slightly get out of my depth, and Lee will correct everything I say in a session a few hours later. But I think listening to many of our partners around here, listening to our customers, it's incumbent upon us to not make the same mistakes we made in the infrastructure security space or the network security space. And instead of coming up with point solutions to your problems in the cloud, our hope is we will bring you a cloud security platform where different parts of the problem are solved in one place. Whether you have, you need inline security, whether you need security in how to manage your workloads, and look through all the things that your DevOps people are doing, whether you need security on the CASB side. And our effort is to make sure that all these things start to work together, so you don't have to go create yet another integration problem by saying, I need 7 different vendors in my cloud transition from here to there. It's very clear to us as we talk to our customers, the future is not cloud only. It's either a hybrid future where you still have your on-prem and you still have your cloud and you've got data going back and forth, or you have a multi-cloud future. So it becomes important for let's just say, for an independent third-party security partner to be able to give you that security operating platform on the cloud as much as it is important to work with the public cloud providers to make sure that the infrastructure is there and secure. So it's kind of a shared security model between the customer and the public cloud infrastructure provider, and we hope to be representing the customer in that instance.
Absolutely. One of the things I know we talked about before you joined the company was a concept of what data allows for exponential growth, right? Some as data collection itself, and some just as exponential growth of companies. You have an enormous amount of experience from being early on at Google, of seeing a platform just really, really take off. I wonder maybe you can draw some analogies between your experience on seeing big data sets driving exponential growth and what you see going to happen with data for cybersecurity. Like if in 5 years' time, if we said, what does success look like there? What do you think that's going to look like?
I think it's sort of like if you said 2 years ago in the United States, we've been going through this debate of whether the cloud is right for me or not. And I think as I listen to people more, and I wasn't here 4 years ago, but I can imagine the conversation is much more advanced today in terms of is cloud the right outcome for us. And I think it's fair to say everybody's either experimenting or has some part of their infrastructure moving to the cloud. We ourselves at Palo Alto are going through this huge debate about how much of our services and our products should be moving to the public cloud versus doing it on-prem and building our own data centers. And it's a tough debate because Lee said this in an earlier meeting that in your first iteration you think the costs are going to increase and you don't get any benefit. You're just doing a lift and shift. You go back and re-architect and you say, okay, I can see, but it seems like a lot of work for not a lot of effort. But when you think about it the third time, you re-architect, you start thinking about scalability, you actually get the benefits. And I think the conversation on data is just beginning. Mm-hmm. I think if I walked up to someone saying, hey, let's collect all your organization's data in one place and run analytics on it, the first thought that comes to mind is, oh my God, I'm creating one large data lake. What if somebody gets access to it, right? Now I put all my eggs in one basket, we have a problem. That's not the data we're talking about. We're actually talking about behavioral data for users and behavioral data for good actors so we can build patterns, so we understand when a bad actor behavior shows up as part of our infrastructure. So I think that conversation is just beginning, but I am fundamentally convinced that unless we create good data in an organization, we're not going to be able to protect it in the future. Because the good news is your weakest link is my biggest opportunity as a bad actor. I'm not worried about the 99% that you've got covered really well. It's that 1% I'm looking for. And that 1% is going to be an algorithm which runs against your computing infrastructure. And I love what Rob said about offensive cybersecurity, not just defensive cybersecurity, because that's what the bad actors are doing. They're running offensive sort of programs all the time looking for your weakest link. So our job becomes to start focusing the weakest link and trying to strengthen it, because they're not going to come, try and break into a brand spanking new Palo Alto Networks firewall. They're going to look for something that's been there for 5 years in your infrastructure, which you don't have visibility to sometimes. They're going to be chasing that down. So we've got to get to sort of a baseline where we feel very comfortable that we're getting good data, we're analyzing patterns, we're analyzing behaviors, and be able to anticipate those and then do something about it back into the infrastructure.
Yeah, that makes sense. Switching gears for a second, Palo Alto Networks has been very privileged to work with this community for a long time in a lot of ways, either as supporters or prime movers of things like the Joint Service Academy Cyber Summit that we started, the Cyber Threat Alliance that we started, working with Vets in Tech, along with a lot of other technology companies. One of the things I noticed is sort of a divergence in Silicon Valley, I'll call it from the mission, right? There's definitely...
It's a polite word.
Well, it's true, right? It's real, and just maybe the audience be interested in your view on, Palo Alto Networks' commitment to the federal space and programs that we're working on just in your first few months' time. How do you feel about that?
Look, first and foremost, I want to acknowledge and recognize the contribution Mark has made to the effort at Palo Alto Networks, and especially as it relates to our federal sector and being fully engaged with Washington and making sure that we move in lockstep with the needs of our country. So, first of all, I'd like a round of applause for Mr. McLaughlin here. Yep. And I think, Mark, my intention, our intention as a company, I speak on behalf of all of us, is first and foremost, as you know, we didn't let you run away too far. So Mark is the vice chairman of our board, and we work together on this topic. So you get, as I said, you get 2 for the price of 1. But look, we're going to keep following your lead in this space in terms of our commitment to the federal space and our commitment to enabling security for all of our agencies, both civilian and government agencies in DC. I think our job is to provide cybersecurity. Our job is to enable good business, good mission-driven sort of work for each of our customers, and that's kind of where we start, and that's kind of where we end. Mm-hmm. I think it's not for us to take positions on what people do. I don't think we should change any of our commitments as a company to the space.
And I don't think we have time to.
So I'm going to ask one question. So
okay.
You've got to ask all the questions. So, part of change creates some degree of risk and uncertainty. And you've asked me that question, as you've come in, how are we going to make sure we keep our commitment? I'd love for you to spend a few minutes, the last few remaining minutes, of reasserting your commitment to supporting this space as part of Palo Alto Networks, to be a vice chairman and the champion for our Fed business.
Yep, it's been a privilege to do everything we can as a company, and also have served in uniform as well for the country. And I hope to continue that through working with the company, and also continue to be on the NSTAC, which you're familiar with. And Jeanette also mentioned the NSTAC work. In less than a month's time, we'll be back at the White House to report out on the cybersecurity moonshot. I don't know if everybody's heard about that. If not, I believe you will hear a lot about that shortly, which is, and I had the privilege of chairing that for the NSTAC, which is basically the idea of that Rob ended with, which was really what's needed in cyber is lots of hard work, but also a lot of leadership, right? So the cyber moonshot idea is if we said that we had it as a mission for the nation, and this is a global effort, but we have to start somewhere in the nation, that we're going to make the internet safe in 10 years. Whether that's doable or not, but if that was your job, right, what would you do differently than what we do today? And I think the answer to be probably a whole host of things where it feels like everybody's working really hard, but can be very incremental, as opposed to really catalytic substantive changes on education. How do we think about our relationships on a geopolitical basis? How do we think about quantum computing? How do we think about technology, like Nikesh talked about, of platforms and most of security being software and not having to deploy a million different things? Very important topics and concepts. So I'm looking forward to continue that as well. And I ask, and the wish was granted by the board, Nikesh, if I could stay involved with this community as well, just because I have a lot of time and effort and a lot of respect for the mission on that. So, and then, but I'll end with one question for you, which is, because we'll be back here in a year's time, and in a year's time, sitting back up here, is there one or two things that you'd feel really good about that the company has done to move the ball forward, specific with the federal community, or just generally? But what's your number one, number two objectives for the next year?
Look, I think a year from now, specifically, if you were at this event, I saw Grant talk about how they've gone from cloud first to cloud smart, and I'd really appreciate that sort of change in the philosophy of going to cloud smart. But I'd love to come in here from now and see it be cloud smart and secure. Because somehow it's just moving to the cloud doesn't make you more secure. You have to rethink security as you move to the cloud. And my fear is if we don't do that in lockstep with the transition, we run the risk of trying to sort of close the doors after the animals have left. So I think it's very important for us 1 year from now to come back and say, okay, we did cloud smart, but we also created some phenomenal use cases where we did it in a secure fashion, because it's very important that the early adopters get it right, because that reinforces it for all the other people across the sort of landscape. So I'd love to make sure that our teams work closely with people in government to make sure that we make that transition successfully for a few of our key partners, from cloud smart to cloud smart and secure. I think secondly, as a company, what I'd love for us to be able to do is show some showcases where we've actually been able to collect data across one enterprise and be able to show that we can run analytics, and the security posture is not just moved incrementally, but exponentially for those people, so that we can, again, create a showcase for other people to look at and say, well, that's an interesting insight. Maybe that's what we all need to do.
Great.
So.
Great. Well, thanks a lot, and welcome aboard. And thank you, everybody, for attending today, and we look forward to the rest of the day.
Thanks, Mark. Thank you.